Hey, how's it going?
I wanted to bring Maddie on my channel today to talk about product design at startups. I'm doing a series of videos interviewing a number of awesome product designers who are doing this work. And Maddie, you are the second person I'm interviewing for this. And I have a lot of questions as it relates to startups. I haven't worked at a startup for a really long time. I did when I was in college. I've
Okay.
talked about that a little bit in some of my other videos, but not a whole lot. And
Yeah.
it's just, I'm interested to learn more about it. I work at a company where our product design team is like over 100 people. That's going to be
Wow.
a totally different experience to what you're used to, I guess, at your job. So just wanted to learn more about what that experience is like. And hopefully anyone who's considering jobs at a startup, they could learn something from you and how to navigate it all.
Yeah, awesome.
I wanted to start by just having you share, like, who are you? What do you do? What do you care about?
Okay, sure. So I'm Maddie. I am a product designer. So I kind of got my start in graphic design. That's like what I went to school for. I think that's the same with you, Alexa, right?
That's right. Yep, me too.
Yeah. Yeah. So then my first job out of college was actually like a product design job or kind of a UX focused job. That was the first I had ever even heard of UX or like working in tech as a designer. And it's just the first job I could get, in Pittsburgh when I first graduated and needed a job. So that was sort of what got me into tech. I really liked it, then moved to Colorado and worked for myself for a little bit, doing some work in tech, but also mostly doing like branding and web design and things like that for some small freelance clients.
What brought you to Colorado? Like, why did you make that move?
Yeah, so my boyfriend got a job in Colorado,
That'll do
and
it.
even though we had only been dating a while, we kind of wanted to give it a try. Like, moving in together, it was a risk, but we don't regret it at all. And we love Colorado, so it's really worked out. And I started my freelance business with a friend who I went to school with, and she was coincidentally also moving to the Denver area. So we were like, this was kind of meant to be.
Yeah.
Like I could be like, oh, well, I'm moving for work,
You're right,
I'm
right.
not moving for my boyfriend. I'm moving like to start my business.
Yeah.
So
It all just like worked
anyway,
out. Yeah, totally.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, stuck around in Colorado. And since everything I had been working remote, I was kind of looking for something new, and the Adobe Creative Residency opportunity popped up. And so I won't go too far into that because I talk a lot about it on my own channel. But basically, I was able to work for Adobe remotely for a year. And that's what allowed me to start my channel. And so I got really interested in that and sharing content online throughout the residency. And then after that, it was kind of time to like get a big girl job again. And so that is how I found out about Lunchbox just throughout my kind of job search process. So that's what I'm doing now, working as a product designer for Lunchbox, which is a startup. And yeah, I've been really loving it so far. I'm in month number 2, so it's still early,
Yay.
but I'm loving it.
Oh my God. Okay. Cannot wait to talk more about all of the things related to Lunchbox and startups and interviewing and all that. And actually just kind of with all of that in mind, I'm curious as to why you wanted to work at a startup at this point in your career.
Yeah, so I've always liked the startup culture, if that's how you want to say it. Like startups, in my experience, can range anywhere from like 2 people, one person even, to like our company now has, I think, 230 people. It's grown a lot in the past year, but it still has that startup culture. And what I mean is like we move really quickly, and anyone in the organization has like a say in like sort of has an ability to make a big impact, which I really like. So before working at Lunchbox, I had a short stint at a tiny startup that did not really get off the ground at all, where I was one of 4 people in the startup. I was the only designer. So that's kind of a totally different experience in startups that was really cool. And I loved it because I was able to make such a big impact. But I didn't feel secure in the job at all because it was sort of all, it all hinged on, was this thing going to take off? And so that was scary for me. And at a point in my life where like I need to be sort of secure financially, like we were looking to buy a house and now we have a mortgage and all of that. I just needed something a little bit more stable, but I still really like the culture of the startup. So I was looking for something where I would work on a design team with other product designers. I'd be able to collaborate with engineers, product managers, and all that, but I would still be able to like voice how I felt about like strategy stuff, not just design stuff, but sort of more big picture strategy and things like that, because that's something that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit with Mar, who is the other product designer I interviewed, who works at a company, an awesome company called Fast. And we talked a little bit about this, right? I work on a team. The company itself is much larger. I think we're like over 6,000 employees, but the product design team is just over 100. And so there's just so many more people who have opinions, and there's a lot more levels to it. So it's there's in a sense there's a little bit there's more structure and process involved, which means we just, as much as we try to operate efficiently, it's going to be slower than
Sure.
working at a startup. And so anyway, super
Yeah.
not surprising, I guess, but like, yeah, just I think it's an important consideration when like
Yep.
you're thinking about working at a startup versus a larger company. There's going to be a big difference there, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And it gets tricky. Like I'm interested to see sort of how Lunchbox changes in terms of structure as time goes on, because the team is growing. And so it's sort of those like growing pains happen where it's like, okay, we've functioned like this for so long, but now they're starting to bring on more sort of like manager roles because there are more product designers and breaking us up into pods. So I'm like on a pod with only one other designer and a PM and a group of engineers. Like that's kind of our pod. But at the same time, there's still that thing like, oh, we need someone to work on this. Who has the bandwidth? And it's like, hey, the new girl does,
Yeah.
And so I'm brought on to other stuff too. So it's kind of a cool mix. It's like, yeah, there's some structure, but it's also kind of crazy at times.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting too, just comparing, right? Like what it sounds like your experience at Lunchbox versus the first startup you worked with after Adobe, which is that, you kind of maybe do want a little bit of that leveling and like an understanding of where you're going to go in your career at the company.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely felt that like in my last job where I was the only designer, I was like, I'm learning a lot about startups and how to try to get something off the ground, but I'm not really like improving my design skills or my skills working with engineers. Like I'm sort of just every day, like it's something new. And so I'm learning and gaining a lot of cool experience, but yeah, it's different to be learning from like a senior designer who has been at the company a while and can actually, sort of mentor me in an informal way. So that is also something I was looking for.
Yeah, or a design director. Like I remember you talked a little bit about in a recent video you made on your channel. I want to talk more about Lunchbox in a little bit, but before we do, I want to talk about your experience interviewing at startups. Because again, you made a couple of videos about this. I know you made one specifically about your experience interviewing. I think it was at Lunchbox, but I would just love to hear, what was your general experience like interviewing at startups, and how does it compare, I guess, to your other experience interviewing at other types of companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, to be honest, most of the companies I've interviewed with in my career were startups. What Not early stage startups, but startups that were growing. Like I've sort of always liked that type of energy. So those are usually the companies that I would interview with. And they kind of tend to take on what I think is characteristic of like a big tech company interview process, and you can tell me better than anyone else. So there were 5 rounds of interviews, which surprised me because it's a startup. So they have like a talent acquisition person who I interviewed with first, and then 5, actually, so I guess 6 rounds, and then 5 individuals on the product team that I interviewed with. And so It went really fast, but there were a lot of rounds.
How does that relate to your experience interviewing with that, or interviewing with that startup that was just like 2 or 3 people?
So for that interview, where it was sort of a less established company, they really wanted to see how I thought about their specific like problem space. So
Okay.
where I would think that might be a red flag for a bigger company where it's like, do some actual work for us and we'll
Yeah.
see how you do. I didn't find it to be a red flag with them because they're looking for someone who can think about their problem space in a way that maybe is different from how they're thinking of it, or that aligns, or whatever. They want to actually see what your perspective is on it and how you would work with them. So I got like a little, like, I guess, an exercise that I did outside of the interview for like 3 hours. I worked on it, and then we kind of had a meeting together that was basically like the daily stand-up meetings that we would have, for the next 4 months when I worked with them, where we would collaborate, talk about design, talk about how that would transfer into, what the developer could build and all of this stuff. So it was sort of like, we want to see how we could work together.
Yeah, no,
Versus,
that's a good point. I just want to jump in really quickly here. That's a good point, because if you're in a team of 3 people and let's say you're the first design hire, you're almost like you're like a founding member. And so,
yeah,
you want to, you would want to be really deep into and passionate about the problem space, or like the product space.
exactly.
So I can totally imagine that interview to be to just be a little bit more different or specific in that way. And I think that's totally
Yep.
fine.
100%. I agree. At first it was sort of like, okay, I have a little bit of an issue doing these like practice projects and all this stuff. Like when I was early in my career and it was my first job, I was like, oh, I'll do anything for free, to like get a chance at being hired. But at this point, I'm sort of like, I'm interviewing at a lot of places. Do I really want to do a practice project for every company? No. But I really liked these guys that were interviewing with me and I wanted to work with them. So it's sort of like a give and take. Like
Yeah.
if you get bad vibes, then
Yes.
step away and don't do it. But if you get good vibes, then I don't know. It's sometimes worth sort of putting your feelings aside and be like, okay, no, like I want to see what this is all about. Like I want to experiment with the problem space too. So anyway,
I like
that's
that.
sort of how it was different.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think you really have to trust your intuition and like the feeling
Yes.
that you feel when you talk to the people, especially at a small startup where it's going to be a smaller group. And that goes a
Yes.
long way. We can't have this conversation about startups without talking about the startup, more specifically about the startup that you are working at, Lunchbox.
Yeah.
So what is Lunchbox? What's the product that you're building? What is the industry, what's the industry? What is Lunchbox trying to do?
Yeah, so it's cool. It's in the food tech space. And so Lunchbox is basically a suite of tools of products that helps restaurants who have multiple locations sort of have their own online ordering experience on web and app, as well as like add-ons like loyalty and things like that. So it's kind of an alternative to things like Postmates and Uber Eats, which take a large cut of any transactions done on the app. And instead, we charge them whatever. We have a deal with them, and what they get is their own app. So we don't take a cut of their sales or anything like that. They just pay to work with us and have us build those things for them. So different business model, but kind of answering the same problem as like online ordering and stuff for restaurants. I mostly focus on consumer and usability. So the actual sort of components that make up the online ordering app. Like, let's say that we want to allow for like pizza chains. Then we need sort of like a specific UI for pizza chains to be able to like have their customers order online.
Cool. Are you dabbling a little bit into design systems design then? Is that right?
Yes.
Cool.
So I was brought on to work on consumer and usability. That's a pod, but they had a really big gap in another pod, which was working a lot on the design system. So I was kind of transferred over there for a hot minute, and we did a lot of work with the design system, basically just updating the Figmas to be super, super easy to use, which is another growing pain. They just hadn't done that yet. So having like all these templates and libraries and things like that, and that kind of thing is just, it's so satisfying to me.
Good, yeah.
So I loved working
Important
on that.
work. Yeah, it's important
Yeah.
work. Especially early on at a startup. I think that like laying the foundation of the design system and making sure it's usable by the internal teams, like that's super valuable work. So it's super cool you're working on that. Okay, I'm somewhat obsessed with learning about the different structure of design teams. So I was curious to learn what it's like at Lunchbox.
Yeah. So what we have is, I believe, 6 product designers, and we're split up between pods, like I mentioned. So 1 or 2 designers on each pod. There are also a couple of designers that focus more on data and research that are sort of floating around pods and helping out here and there. And then each pod has a few engineers and a product manager. And so I would say that our product team is probably like 24 at this point, 24 people between those 3 sort of areas, as well as like managers and things like that. And so, yeah, on the product team, that's sort of how we function. And then there are also other designers that work on what's called the studio team, that they do more like rebrands for restaurants that want to do that, marketing and things like that. So that's kind of like a totally different thing.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask about like, where are the brand designers, or like you know, where do they sit? So it sounds like they're part of a separate organization.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. And so at Zendesk, where I work, we have the most people within our product design team are the product designers. But we also have UX researchers and content designers. So does your team have any of those? Where, like, you know, how's that work getting done?
Yeah, so we have 1 UX researcher, and right now she has a lot on her plate. So we're actually starting to do something cool where she is every week kind of helping us do more of our own research, which I think is cool. It can be ad hoc. It doesn't have to be like really, really rigid, but just so she kind of shares some of her resources with us, we can start to do a little bit of our own research if she's not available to always be doing all of it. So that's sort of an in-between solution. Like at a startup, I'm sure there's a lot of this where it's like, we can't hire another UX researcher right this second. So what should we do to sort of fill that gap? And so that's what we're doing. In terms of content designers, that's usually the studio team that does content and things like that.
Okay. And then I also, again, I remember from this video that you made that you talked about interviewing with a director of design, or is that right? Okay. Yeah. So what is the design leadership structure look like at Lunchbox? Again, like a smaller startup.
Yes. So there's a director of product who is brand new. She started just before me. And there is a design director who's my direct manager, also got hired around the same time as me. And then underneath him is all of us. So the senior designer, there's only 1 senior designer on our team right now. The other 5 or 4 or 5 of us are product designers, like kind of mid-level. And so that's kind of the structure there. And, you know, the director of product is part of like, I forget what they call it, like the C level. Is that what they call it? Like the,
I guess it depends on the company and like, but yeah.
So she is sort of she's not one of the founding members, but she is sort of like the most high up. So she, you know, gets our budget and all of that stuff, and it all trickles down from her. But it's very cool because she's brand new. She's able to come in and be like, yeah, we're going to shake things up if we need to shake things up. So it's nothing is rigid. It's very much like, we want to hear what you guys think, especially the new people, which is just, it's really nice. So things are going to be changing, and yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a really good mark to like have someone in design leadership, even at a startup, which I think is a signal to me that the company values design. Maddy, you're also normally based out of Colorado. I believe we talked about this offline, but I think Lunchbox is based in New York or on the East Coast.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So is the company remote friendly, or what is that aspect?
Yeah, so it's interesting because they were based in New York, I should say. It was all in person. There were, maybe 20, 30 people about a year and a half ago. And then, COVID happened and they started to grow because of the industry that they're in, online ordering. And so with that, they started hiring more people, and there was no point in only hiring people in New York, right? So they became remote friendly. And then as the pandemic was, stretching out to be years and years long, they were like, we're getting rid of our office. So now it's completely remote, and they have employees not just all around the US, but around the world. So now you can apply to work at Lunchbox from literally anywhere.
Really? Literally
Yeah.
anywhere? What? That
Yes.
is so freaking cool. Let's talk about culture a little bit, something else that I love talking about. I know you've only been at Lunchbox for 2 months, 2 short months, but do you have like a favorite team ritual or, what anything that stands out that you've really enjoyed being a part of with this team?
So we haven't done anything like an offsite or anything. We have a couple like holiday virtual parties coming up, which I'm very excited about. But we do have like our Monday design meeting, which isn't like a critique or anything. It's almost like a catch up where the first 25 minutes are just talking about your weekend, and the last 5 minutes are like, okay, this is what we're doing this week, which is cool. I think I just really appreciate my manager, the design director, his whole sort of attitude as a director is very open and transparent. Like he came in and has some things about the company and the structure that he wants to change and that he doesn't like. And instead of sort of holding that against the company or keeping it to himself and like having this weird attitude, it's just very like, as a team, we're going to make this team better, and I want your help with that. And it's all good. It's like it's positive, and at the same time, it's like, yeah, it's kind of calling out things that need to change, but in a way that still keeps things upbeat. So I just kind of like the overall attitude. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to, it just sounds like the company values design and they put people in leadership who are, who have design backgrounds, and that they're, investing in a design culture. And it just, yeah, that sounds great. I love to hear that. Good. Good. Okay. Again, you've only been there 2 months, but what do you feel like you've been the most challenged with so far in your role?
Ooh, okay. I would say I just had to do my like year-end review, even though I've only been there 2 months. And so this is top of mind. I feel like what I am most challenged with is understanding a lot of the back end stuff. So I don't know how much you deal with this at Zendesk. I'd be interested to hear. But a lot of times when I'm designing, there's a disconnect between what I understand about the back end and the reality of what can be built, and sort of why those limitations exist and if they should exist or if we should push past them and like that kind of thing. So I'm still trying to understand what the best ways are to like learn more about it, because it's not my job to fully understand all the technical stuff, but at the same time I need to understand it enough to design efficiently. So that's something that I really want to work on sort of in 2022. But I'm kind of curious at Zendesk how you work through that kind of stuff. Like, do you work really closely with engineers, or is it only, during a project where you're like hashing these things out?
Yeah, good question. And I think that I love that you brought that up because it's something I've thought a lot about as well in my roles in product design. So you definitely are not alone in that. I'd say from my experience, I feel like I've been super lucky to work with engineers who are really good at communicating kind of like their side of the business and their side of the work. And so I've been able to learn a lot from them that way. And so I think it sounds like you have these pods set up. And so you'll probably partnered with engineers more closely. Yeah. So like they would just be really great people to ask questions of. Maddy, is there anything else related to work, like being a designer at a startup, interviewing Lunchbox, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I don't think so. I would just encourage people to, not be afraid to interview at startups and to understand that there's such a breadth of like what a startup can be. And so if you're not trying to be the only designer, you don't have like, you shouldn't be afraid to work at a startup, because there are startups where you can work on a team, and that's like exactly what I was looking for. And that's what I found at Lunchbox. So I would just encourage you to look into that if startups are something you're interested in.
I'm glad you brought that up, because for whatever reason, still in my head, I think of startup, I think of like 1 or 2 designers, and that's just not the case. Yeah, it's not the case.
It's not, because startups grow. That's sort of what they're trying to do. And so if you find one that has started to grow, then it can be a really good place to work.
Yeah. Okay, good. Maddy, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you, your work, the video content you're creating?
Totally. So I'm on YouTube, just Maddy Beard, Maddy with the Y. And then I'm on Instagram at maddybeard.ux. And I haven't posted on Instagram in so long, but I'll still plug it anyway, because I'm coming back.
I would just like to say Maddy's Instagram is one of my favorites.
Oh,
you heard it here. You heard it here first. I love it.
So nice. Right back at you.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I take a lot of inspiration in your Instagram. So I love what you're doing there.
Oh,
and
love that.
Yes, Maddy, you have a Skillshare class, right? Design course. Let's hear about that. How's that going?
Yes. So it's going good. It's still kind of going strong, which I love. So it's an intro class. And I position it as a class for graphic designers to get into UI UX. But you don't have to be a graphic designer. I don't go into any like design basics in the class, which is why I frame it that way. But it is for people who have an understanding of design, who want to get into UX. And you, throughout the class, work on your first UX project. It's an app project. And I had so much fun making it, and I get pretty good feedback on it. So I'm excited about it, and working on another class very slowly, but it'll come out sometime.
Sometime soon in the next few months. Yeah, no, I totally feel you on that. Yes. Also, highly recommend this course. I watched it on my Skillshare account, and I thought it was awesome. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I love making them. So
that's even better.
Yeah, it's fun.
Awesome. Okay. Maddy, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Cool.
Talk soon. Bye.